Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the stars through the massive viewport. The flagship was huge, bigger than most space stations. Its armor was thick enough to stop asteroids, and weapons covered every surface. Other alien species called it excessive, but humans knew better. They came from Earth, a world so dangerous that most aliens couldn't survive there for a day. The bridge hummed with quiet activity. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, their movements sharp and precise. These were veterans of the Titan Wars, where humans had fought each other in the asteroid belt around Jupiter. Those battles had been brutal, teaching humanity how to fight in the vacuum of space with nothing but metal and determination. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Park from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They want to discuss our fleet positioning again." Tae-ho almost smiled. The Council was nervous about humanity's military strength. Earth had been classified as a Class 3 deathworld, the most dangerous category possible. Gravity that would crush most aliens, weather that could kill in minutes, and predators that had shaped humans into something the galaxy had never seen before. The Council had reluctantly accepted humanity into the galactic community, but they kept humans on a tight leash. "Tell them we're conducting routine exercises," Tae-ho replied. "Our ships need to stay ready." The human fleet was small compared to other species, only 47 ships total. But each ship was built like a fortress. Human engineering was different from alien designs. Where other species built elegant, efficient vessels, humans built things that could survive anything. Their ships could take damage that would destroy other vessels and keep fighting. Dr. Yoon Ji-hee approached from the science station. She was young for a chief science officer, but brilliant. Her work on alien biology had helped humanity understand their new neighbors in the galaxy. Most of them were peaceful, evolved on gentle worlds where cooperation was key to survival. "Admiral, I've been studying the latest reports from the Outer Rim," she said quietly. "The hegemony is expanding again. 3 more systems have gone dark in the past month." Tae-ho's jaw tightened. The hegemony was everything humanity despised, a brutal empire that enslaved weaker species and treated mercy as weakness. They had been growing bolder lately, attacking refugee ships and civilian colonies. The Galactic Council insisted on diplomatic solutions, but diplomacy was hard when one side killed negotiators for sport. "Any word on survivors?" he asked. "A few escape pods were picked up by traders. The stories are bad. Mass executions, slave markets, entire populations disappeared." Ji-hai's voice was steady, but Tae-ho could see the anger in her eyes. Humans had a strong protective instinct, even for aliens they barely knew. Captain Park So-jin entered the bridge from the corridor. She commanded the destroyer squadron, 12 fast attack ships that could punch holes through enemy armor. So-jin was tough, a veteran of countless battles who never backed down from a fight. Her crews worshipped her because she always brought them home. "Admiral, my ships are ready for patrol duty. The engines are running hot and the crews are getting restless. We need something to do besides practice drills." Before Tae-ho could respond, an alarm sounded across the bridge. Emergency signals were rare, and this one had priority codes that made everyone snap to attention. "Incoming transmission," called the communications officer. "It's weak, long range, and badly damaged." "Put it through." Static filled the bridge, then a voice broke through the noise. It was alien, speaking in the common galactic language, but the desperation was clear to everyone listening. "This is refugee vessel Hope's Dawn, under attack by hegemony raiders. Civilian population. Children aboard. Please help. Our shields are failing. They're boarding us. The transmission was cut off by the sound of weapons fire and screaming. Then silence. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Every human officer understood what they had just heard. Somewhere in space, families were being slaughtered by hegemony forces, while the galaxy did nothing. "Can we trace the signal?" Tejo asked. Ji-Hai was already working at her console. The transmission came from the Kepler Nebula. It's 3 days away at maximum burn. The signal was automated, probably sent just before their communications were destroyed. So Jin stepped forward. "Admiral, my destroyers can make the jump in 2 days if we push the engines. We can conduct reconnaissance and report back." Tejo considered this. Standard protocol would be to notify the Galactic Council and wait for their response fleet. But the nearest council ships were 2 weeks away, and that was assuming they actually decided to help. The council preferred to negotiate with the hegemony, hoping to find peaceful solutions to their expansion. "Sir," called the tactical officer, "long-range sensors are detecting more distress signals from that area. Multiple ships under attack." The admiral looked around his bridge. His officers were waiting for orders, their faces grim but determined. These were people who had grown up on a world where everything tried to kill them. They understood that sometimes violence was the only answer to violence. Commander Lee Hyun-woo entered the bridge from the Marine section. He was a big man, scarred, from years of combat, leading the toughest soldiers in human space. His Marines were trained for boarding actions and planetary assaults, jobs that other species couldn't handle. "Admiral, my Marines are ready for immediate deployment. We can be in drop pods within the hour." Lieutenant Choi Dong-min's voice came over the intercom from the flight deck. "Fighter squadrons are armed and ready. Just give us a target. Tejo." Walked to the tactical display showing the fleet positions. 47 ships, each one a masterpiece of human military engineering. Destroyers that could take on cruisers twice their size. Cruisers with enough firepower to crack planets. And the Indomitable itself, a dreadnought that had never lost a battle. The Galactic Council would be furious if humanity acted without permission. They liked their wars neat and political, with proper declarations and negotiated rules. But humans had learned war in asteroid fields and radiation storms, where hesitation meant death. "Communications. Send a message to all ships," Tejo ordered. "All vessels prepare for immediate departure. Set course for the Kepler Nebula. Maximum burn." "Sir," the communications officer looked uncertain. "Should I notify the council?" "Send them our tactical plan after we're underway. Tell them we're responding to a humanitarian crisis." So Jin grinned. "The whole fleet, Admiral, for a rescue mission?" Tejo's expression was hard as the metal around them. "Captain, we're not sending a patrol. We're sending a message. The hegemony needs to learn what happens when they attack civilians while humans are watching." The bridge erupted into controlled chaos as orders were relayed throughout the fleet. Engines roared to life, weapon systems powered up, and the most dangerous military force in known space prepared to show the galaxy what Deathworlders could do when they decided to act. The stars began to shift as the human fleet turned toward their destination, carrying death and salvation in equal measure. The human fleet burned through space at speeds that would kill most alien crews. The acceleration pressed against every surface of the ships, but the humans barely noticed. They had grown up in gravity wells that would crush other species, and their ships were built to handle forces that would tear apart conventional vessels. Admiral Kim Tae-ho walked through the corridors of the Indomitable, checking on his crew's preparations. The ship was a maze of thick armor and redundant systems. Every wall could become a barricade, every corridor could be sealed off if needed. Humans built their ships like fortresses because they came from a world where everything was trying to kill them. In the Marine quarters, Commander Lee Hyun-woo was addressing his troops. 2,000 Marines filled the massive assembly bay, their armor black and functional. Each soldier carried weapons that other species considered too powerful for infantry use, but humans had learned that overwhelming firepower solved most problems. "Listen up," Hyun-woo's voice echoed through the bay. "Intelligence reports suggest we're looking at a slave raid. Hegemony forces are torturing civilians for sport while waiting for their fleet to arrive. They think no one will challenge them." Young Marine raised her hand. "Sir, what's our rules of engagement?" Hyun-woo's smile was cold. "The hegemony doesn't take prisoners. Neither do we. Any questions?" There were none. These Marines had volunteered for the human military, knowing they would face the galaxy's worst nightmares. They were ready on the flight deck. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min was conducting final checks on his fighter squadron. The hangar bay was filled with sleek attack craft, each one capable of maneuvers that would kill alien pilots. Human fighters were built to operate in asteroid fields and around gas giants where a single mistake meant death. "Remember," Dong-min told his pilots, "human fighters are faster and tougher than anything the hegemony flies, but they outnumber us, so we stick to pack tactics. Hit hard, move fast, and trust your wingmen." The youngest pilot, barely 20 years old, looked nervous. "Sir, what if we're too late? What if the civilians are already dead?" Dong-min's expression hardened. "Then we make sure the hegemony regrets it. Fear is a teacher, and we're about to give them a lesson they'll never forget." Dr. Yoon Ji-hai was in her laboratory, preparing medical supplies for multiple alien species. Her research had taught her that most galactic civilizations were peaceful by human standards. They evolved on gentle worlds where cooperation was more important than competition. The idea of systematic cruelty was foreign to them. "The hegemony is different," she explained to her medical team. "They're predators like us, but they prey on the weak instead of protecting them. Their psychology is built around domination and fear." Her assistant, a young human doctor, looked confused. "If they're predators like us, why do they target civilians?" "Because they're not predators," Ji-hai replied. "They're parasites. Real predators respect their prey and take only what they need. The hegemony takes everything and destroys what's left." On the destroyer Retribution, Captain Park So-jin was reviewing tactical data with her officers. The bridge was smaller than the Indomitables, but just as deadly. Destroyers were humanity's answer to larger enemy ships. Fast, heavily armed. Vessels that could punch above their weight class. "The Kepler Nebula will give us cover for the initial approach," So-jin explained. "But once we engage, we'll be in open space. The hegemony will have superior numbers." Her tactical officer, a veteran of the Titan Wars, looked unconcerned. "Ma'am, when has that ever stopped us?" So-jin smiled. "Never. That's why we're still here." The human fleet had been traveling for 2 days when they received an update from long-range sensors. The news was bad. 3 more distress signals had been detected, all cutting off abruptly. The hegemony wasn't just raiding. They were systematically hunting down refugee ships. Admiral Tae-ho called a conference with his senior officers. The holographic display showed the Kepler Nebula and the last known positions of the attacked ships. Red markers indicated where transmissions had ended. "Intelligence suggests we're looking at a coordinated operation," Tae-ho began. "The hegemony isn't just raiding. They're clearing out an entire sector, probably to establish a forward base." Commander Hyun-woo studied the tactical display. "Sir, if they're planning a permanent presence, we're not just rescuing civilians. We're stopping an invasion." Dr. Ji-hai had been analyzing the alien distress calls. "Admiral, I've identified at least 6 different species in those transmissions. These are refugee fleets, probably carrying survivors from other hegemony attacks." The implications were clear. The hegemony wasn't just expanding their territory. They were conducting genocide on a massive scale, driving entire species from their homes and hunting down the survivors. Captain So-jin leaned forward. "Sir, the Council needs to know about this. If the hegemony is conducting systematic extermination, the Council will debate for months while more civilians die," Taeho interrupted. "We're 3 hours from the nebula. What we find there will determine our response." Lieutenant Dong-min's voice came through the intercom. "Admiral, forward scouts are reporting massive energy signatures ahead, multiple capital ships, and they're not running silent." The bridge fell quiet. Capital ships meant a major hegemony, fleet, not just raiders. This was a full military operation. "How many ships?" Taeho asked. "At least 12 heavy cruisers, sir, probably more hiding in the nebula." The odds were bad. 12 enemy capital ships against 47 human vessels, many of them smaller destroyers and frigates. In conventional galactic warfare, the humans would be massively outgunned, but humans didn't fight conventional wars. "All ships, reduce speed and go to silent running," Taeho ordered. "I want to see what we're dealing with before they know we're here." The fleet slowed as they approached the edge of the nebula. Advanced sensors penetrated the gas clouds, revealing the tactical situation. It was worse than they had hoped, but not as bad as it could have been. The hegemony fleet was arranged in a hunting formation, with lighter ships driving refugee vessels toward the heavy cruisers. At least 4 civilian ships were still intact, but they were trapped and being systematically destroyed. One ship caught everyone's attention. It was massive, clearly a civilian vessel designed to carry thousands of passengers. Its shields were failing, and hegemony boarding craft were attacking, its hull like insects on a dying animal. "That's the Hope's Dawn," Ji-hai identified. "The ship that sent the original distress call." Through the viewports, they could see escape pods being launched from the civilian vessel, only to be shot down by hegemony fighters. The aliens weren't just conquering. They were enjoying the hunt. Admiral Taeho looked around his bridge. His officers were waiting for orders, their faces calm, but their eyes filled with cold anger. These were humans who had grown up fighting for survival, and they recognized evil when they saw it. "Communications, open a channel to the hegemony fleet," he ordered. "Sir?" "You heard me. I want to talk to whoever's in charge." The communications officer worked quickly, breaking through hegemony encryption. A few moments later, a harsh alien voice filled the bridge. "Unknown vessels. This is Warlord Brutax of the Hegemony Third Fleet. You are entering a military exclusion zone. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Taeho's response was calm and measured. "This is Admiral Kim Taeho of the Human Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to cease your attack on civilian vessels and withdraw from this system." Alien laughter echoed through the bridge. "Humans? The council pets from the Deathworld? You are outnumbered 12 to 1, mammal. Leave now and we might let you live." The transmission ended. Around the bridge, human officers exchanged glances. They had been insulted, threatened, and dismissed. In human culture, that meant it was time to teach a lesson. Admiral Taeho checked his chronometer. 30 seconds as promised. The time expired. "All ships," he announced across the fleet. engage at will. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations. The human fleet didn't follow any conventional battle doctrine. Instead of careful long-range engagements and tactical withdrawals, they did something that terrified alien observers. They accelerated directly toward the enemy. Captain Park Sojin led her destroyer squadron in a maneuver that alien tacticians would call suicide. The 12 ships formed a tight arrow formation and burned straight at the hegemony center line. Their engines pushed acceleration levels that would kill most alien crews, but humans had evolved in crushing gravity. To them, this was just another day. All weapons, target their command ship, Sojin ordered. Let's cut the head off this snake. Warlord Brutax watched the human approach with amusement. These Deathworlders were clearly inexperienced in real space combat. They were charging directly into his trap, abandoning all tactical advantages. Concentrate fire on the lead ships, he commanded. Show them what happens when primitives challenge a superior civilization. The hegemony fleet opened fire with massive energy weapons, the kind that could crack planets. Brilliant beams of destruction reached across space toward the approaching human ships. Any normal fleet would have been vaporized instantly. The human ships kept coming. Their armor, designed to survive asteroid impacts and solar radiation, absorbed damage that should have destroyed them. Where alien ships were built for efficiency, human vessels were built for survival. Every surface was armored, every system had backups, and every crew member was trained to keep fighting even when their ship was falling apart. Lieutenant Choi Dongmin's fighter squadron launched from the carriers at impossible speeds. Human. Fighters were small and fast, built to navigate asteroid fields where a single mistake meant death. They swarmed around the larger hegemony ships like angry wasps, their weapons designed to punch through capital ship armor. Focus on their weapon systems, Dongmin ordered his pilots. Take out their guns and they're just floating targets. The young pilot who had been nervous before was now grinning with fierce joy. This was what humans were built for. The moment. When civilization fell away and only the predator remained. He dove his fighter between two hegemony cruisers, firing continuously at their shield generators. On the Indomitable, Admiral Tae-ho watched the battle unfold with calm satisfaction. The hegemony fleet was larger, but they fought like bureaucrats, careful, measured, and predictable. Humans fought like the apex predators they were. Target their flagship, he ordered. All forward batteries, maximum power. The dreadnought's main guns fired in sequence, each shot carrying enough energy to level a city. The massive kinetic projectiles crossed space at a significant fraction of light speed, striking the hegemony command ship's shields with devastating force. Warlord Brutax felt his ship shudder under the impact. How were these primitive weapons so powerful? Hegemony intelligence had described humans as a minor species with outdated technology. "Damage report," he shouted. "Forward shields at 30% and falling," his tactical officer replied. "Sir, their weapons are unlike anything in our database. They're using kinetic projectiles with nuclear warheads." The warlord's blood ran cold. Only a species completely insane would fire nuclear weapons in close combat. The radiation alone should kill their own crews. But somehow the humans kept fighting. Commander Lee Hyun-woo's voice echoed through the Marine quarters. "Boarding parties, prepare for launch. We're going to take some prisoners and find out what they know about other civilian ships." The Marines loaded into assault pods, small craft designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver troops directly into enemy ships. It was the most dangerous form of combat possible. But humans had been boarding enemy vessels since they first built boats on Earth's deadly oceans. Sergeant Major Han Bo-ram checked her demolition charges one last time. "Remember, we want their Command staff alive for questioning. Everyone else is expendable. The assault pods launched from the human ships like bullets, crossing the space between fleets in seconds. Hegemony Point defense systems tried to stop them, but the pods were small, fast, and heavily armored. Most made it through. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai monitored the battle from the medical bay, tracking casualty reports and preparing for wounded. So far, human losses were minimal. Their ships were taking damage, but their superior engineering kept them fighting. Amazing, she muttered, watching the tactical display. They're winning. Captain So-jin's destroyer Retribution had closed to point blank range with a hegemony heavy cruiser. At this distance, the enemy's massive size became a disadvantage. They couldn't bring their main guns to bear on the smaller, more agile human ship. Continuous fire on their engine section, So-jin ordered. Let's see how they like being helpless. The destroyer's weapons tore into the enemy's rear armor, causing massive explosions that rippled along the cruiser's hull. Within minutes, the hegemony ship was drifting dead in space, its engines destroyed and life support failing. Lieutenant Dong-min led his fighters in a coordinated strike against another enemy cruiser. Human pilots pulled maneuvers that would have killed alien crews, using their superior reflexes and tolerance for acceleration to outfight ships 10 times their size. "This one's mine," called his wingman, diving toward the cruiser's bridge section. The fighter's weapons, normally used for destroying asteroids, punched through the ship's armor like paper. Across the battlefield, the pattern repeated. Human. Ships, designed for the brutal environment around gas giants and asteroid fields, proved superior to vessels built for the comfortable spaces between stars. Human crews, evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them, fought with an intensity that terrified their enemies. Warlord Brutax watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by forces that should have been no match for his ships. How was this possible? The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, yet they were winning through sheer aggression and superior tactics. "All ships withdraw to the outer system," he ordered. "We need to regroup and call for reinforcements." But it was too late. Admiral Tae-ho had anticipated this response. Human ships had already moved to cut off escape routes, and the hegemony fleet found themselves trapped in a deadly embrace. "Sir," called the tactical officer on the Indomitable, "enemy flagship is trying to escape." Tae-ho's expression was cold as space itself. "Negative. No quarter for slavers. Destroy them." The dreadnought's main guns fired again, this time targeting the hegemony flagship's engine section. The massive ship shuddered under the impact, then began to break apart as secondary explosions tore through its hull. Warlord Brutax died still wondering how a single human fleet had destroyed his entire task force in less than 20 minutes. Commander Hyun-woo's Marines had boarded 3 enemy ships, fighting their way through corridors while hegemony troops fled in terror. These aliens had spent their lives bullying helpless civilians. They had never faced an enemy that fought back with equal ferocity. "Bridge secured," reported Sergeant Major Boram. "We've got their computer cores and several officers for interrogation." The battle was over. 12 hegemony capital ships had been reduced to burning wreckage or disabled hulks. The human fleet had suffered minor damage to 3 ships and lost only 2 fighters. It was the most one-sided victory in galactic military history. Admiral Tae-ho opened communications to the surviving civilian ships. "This is Admiral Kim Tae-ho of the Human Defense Fleet. You are safe now. Prepare to receive medical assistance and escort to safety." The response came in a dozen alien languages, all expressing the same thing. gratitude, relief, and amazement that someone had finally stood up to the hegemony. But Tae-ho knew this was just the beginning. They had won a battle, but the war was far from over. The hegemony was a vast empire with thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. Today's victory would bring consequences. He looked around his bridge at the officers who had just rewritten the rules of galactic warfare. They were ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the battle was worse than Admiral Kim Tae-ho had expected. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai's medical teams worked around the clock, treating survivors from the refugee ships, and their reports painted a picture of systematic horror that made even hardened human veterans angry. The hegemony wasn't just raiding, Ji-hai explained during the senior staff briefing. They were conducting what can only be described as recreational torture. The survivors show signs of deliberate, prolonged abuse designed to cause maximum psychological trauma. Captain Thyman, the commander of the Hope's Dawn, sat in the conference room looking ancient, despite belonging to a species that normally lived for centuries. His hands shook as he described what his people had endured. "They kept us alive for sport," he said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "The raids began 6 months ago. Every few weeks they would attack another refugee convoy. They would torture some passengers to death while forcing others to watch, then release the survivors to spread fear." Commander Lee Hyun-woo's jaw was tight with controlled rage. "How many ships? How many people?" 17 convoys, Thyman replied. "Nearly 50,000 civilians. Men, women, children. It made no difference to them. They broadcast the torture. Sessions across our communication networks to terrorize other refugees." The humans in the room exchanged glances. This wasn't just military expansion, it was genocide with a side of entertainment. Elder Kryvex, speaking for the Ulani survivors, struggled to find words that could convey the horror. "In our language, we have no concept for what the hegemony did. We had to borrow words from predator species to describe their actions." Admiral Tae-ho studied the tactical data his Marines had recovered from the hegemony ships. The intelligence was revealing and terrifying. This attack on refugee convoys was just a small part of a much larger operation. According to their mission logs, the hegemony is planning a major expansion into this sector, he announced. They're not just targeting refugees, they're systematically clearing out entire star systems to establish forward bases. Captain Park So-jin looked up from her datapad. "Sir, their communication logs show they've been coordinating with other fleets. This isn't just one task force, it's part of a campaign involving hundreds of ships." The door to the conference room opened, and a new figure entered. Veltari Council Representative Zephys looked exactly like what she was, a career diplomat from a peaceful species that had never known real war. Her pale blue skin was marked with intricate patterns that indicated high social status, and her large eyes held the kind of naive optimism that humans found both admirable and frustrating. "Admiral Kim," she said in perfect Standard Galactic, "I have come to express the Council's concerns about your recent actions." Tae-ho gestured to an empty chair. "Representative Zephys, please join us. We were just reviewing evidence of hegemony war crimes." The alien diplomat sat carefully, her movements precise and controlled. She had been aboard a Council observation ship that arrived just as the battle ended, and she was clearly struggling to process what she had witnessed. "The Council appreciates your intervention in this humanitarian crisis," she began diplomatically. "However, your methods were extremely violent. Surely there could have been a negotiated solution." Dr. Ji-hai turned her datapad around, showing medical scans. "Representative, These are the injuries we're treating: deliberate torture, systematic starvation, psychological conditioning designed to break the victim's will to resist. What exactly would you have negotiated? Zephys looked at the medical data and turned a shade paler. Her species had evolved on a garden world where the greatest natural threat was seasonal storms. The concept of deliberate cruelty was almost beyond her comprehension. Perhaps economic sanctions, trade restrictions? Surely the hegemony could be persuaded to cease these activities through diplomatic pressure. Commander Hyun-woo leaned forward. Representative, with respect, the hegemony has been expanding for centuries. How has diplomacy worked so far? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room knew the answer. The Galactic Council had been negotiating with the hegemony for decades, while entire species disappeared from the galaxy. Captain Thyman spoke quietly. My people sent diplomatic missions to the hegemony 12 times. They sent back recordings of our ambassadors being tortured to death. The 13th time, we tried to run. Zephys was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. Finally, she looked up at Admiral Taeho. What do you intend to do now? Taeho activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red markers indicated hegemony-controlled systems, while yellow zones showed areas under B, attack or recently conquered. The data we recovered shows active operations against 14 more star systems. Millions of civilians are being systematically exterminated while the Council debates proper procedures. You cannot simply declare war on an entire empire, Zephys protested. There are protocols, procedures, diplomatic channels that must be followed. Your protocols have failed, Captain So-jin said bluntly. While you've been talking, the hegemony has been killing. How many more species need to disappear before the Council acts? Elder Kryvek spoke for the first time since the representative arrived. Honored Council member, my species has sent requests for assistance for 47 years. We have followed every protocol, filed every form, attended every hearing. In that time, our population has dropped from 8 billion to less than 50 million. Your procedures are slower than our extinction. The alien diplomat looked genuinely distressed. Her species valued harmony and consensus above all else, and the idea of unilateral action was deeply disturbing to her worldview. But you're talking about declaring war without Council approval. One species cannot simply decide to attack another empire. There must be debate, discussion, proper authorization. Admiral Taeho walked to the viewport. Looking out at the refugee, ships his fleet was escorting to safety. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species, many of them the sole survivors of their civilizations. Representative Zephys, I want you to understand something about humans. We evolved on a world where hesitation meant death. Our entire history is built on the principle that sometimes violence is the only answer to violence. He turned back to face the room. The hegemony understands only one language: force. They've ignored your diplomatic protests for centuries while committing genocide. It's time someone spoke to them in terms they understand. Dr. Ji-hai pulled up another file on her datapad. The medical data shows evidence of systematic biological experimentation. They're not just killing these people, they're studying them, trying to develop more efficient methods of extermination. The representative stared at the data in horror. Her large eyes filled with tears, a universal mammalian response that crossed species lines. The Council will never approve military action on this scale, she whispered. Even if they wanted to, The bureaucracy alone would take years. Then the Council is part of the problem, Taeho replied. How many species will be extinct by the time your bureaucrats finish debating? Commander Hyun-woo activated his own display, showing troop deployment options. Sir, intelligence indicates that hegemony forces are concentrated in 3 main staging areas. If we strike fast and hard, we can disrupt their entire campaign. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min's voice came through the intercom from the flight deck. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting hegemony reinforcements heading toward this system. Looks like they really didn't like what we did to their fleet. Representative Zephys looked around the room desperately. Please, Admiral Kim, at least give the Council time to respond. Send your evidence to the central government. Let them see what you've discovered. Surely when they understand the scope of the crisis. Taeho's expression was grim. Representative, you're welcome to send whatever reports you like. But understand this. Humanity will not stand by and watch genocide happen when we have the power to stop it. He activated the ship's communication system, opening a channel to the entire human fleet. All vessels. This is Admiral Kim. Based on intelligence gathered from enemy ships, we now know that the hegemony is conducting systematic extermination of civilian populations across 14 star systems. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws recognition of hegemony sovereignty. Any ship flying their colors is now considered a valid military target. The announcement echoed through the fleet and was automatically transmitted to human colonies across the galaxy. In less than an hour, it would reach Earth itself, and the human government would have to decide whether to support their admiral's decision. Representative Zephys stared at him in shock. You've just declared war on an empire with thousands of ships. You're one species among hundreds in the galaxy. Captain Sojin's quiet response chilled everyone in the room. We're Deathworlders, Representative. One is enough. The aftermath of the battle was worse than Admiral Kim Tae-ho had expected. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai's medical teams worked around the clock, treating survivors from the refugee ships, and their reports painted a picture of systematic horror that made even hardened human veterans angry. The hegemony wasn't just raiding, Ji-hai explained during the senior staff briefing. They were conducting what can only be described as recreational torture. The survivors show signs of deliberate, prolonged abuse designed to cause maximum psychological trauma. Captain Thyman, the commander of the Hope's Dawn, sat in the conference room looking ancient, despite belonging to a species that normally lived for centuries. His hands shook as he described what his people had endured. They kept us alive for sport, he said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. The raids began 6 months ago. Every few weeks they would attack another refugee convoy. They would torture some passengers to death while forcing others to watch, then release the survivors to spread fear. Commander Lee Hyun-woo's jaw was tight with controlled rage. How many ships? How many people? 17 convoys, Thyman replied. Nearly 50,000 civilians. Men, women, children. It made no difference to them. They broadcast the torture. Sessions across our communication networks to terrorize other refugees. The humans in the room exchanged glances. This wasn't just military expansion. It was genocide, with a side of entertainment. Elder Kryvex, speaking for the Yulani survivors, struggled to find words that could convey the horror. In our language, we have no concept for what the hegemony did. We had to borrow words from predator species to describe their actions. Admiral Taeho studied the tactical data his Marines had recovered from the hegemony ships. The intelligence was revealing and terrifying. This attack on refugee convoys was just a small part of a much larger operation. According to their mission, logs, the hegemony is planning a major expansion into this sector, he announced. "They're not just targeting refugees, they're systematically clearing out entire star systems to establish forward bases." Captain Park So-Jin looked up from her data pad. "Sir, their communication logs show they've been coordinating with other fleets. This isn't just one task force. It's part of a campaign involving hundreds of ships." The door to the conference room opened, and a new figure entered. Veltari Council Representative Zephys looked exactly like what she was. A career diplomat from a peaceful species that had never known real war. Her pale blue skin was marked with intricate patterns that indicated high social status, and her large eyes held the kind of naive optimism that humans found both admirable and frustrating. "Admiral Kim," she said in perfect standard Galactic, "I have come to express the Council's concerns about your recent actions." Taeho gestured to an empty chair. "Representative Zephys, please join us. We were just reviewing evidence of hegemony war crimes." The alien diplomat sat carefully, her movements precise and controlled. She had been aboard a Council observation ship that arrived just as the battle ended, and she was clearly struggling to process what she had witnessed. "The Council appreciates your intervention in this humanitarian crisis," she began diplomatically. "However, your methods were extremely violent. Surely there could have been a negotiated solution." Dr. Jihai turned her datapad around, showing medical scans. "Representative, these are the injuries we're treating. Deliberate torture, systematic starvation, psychological conditioning designed to break the victim's will to resist. What exactly would you have negotiated?" Zephys looked at the medical data and turned a shade paler. Her species had evolved on a garden world where the greatest natural threat was seasonal storms. The concept of deliberate cruelty was almost beyond her comprehension. Perhaps economic sanctions, trade restrictions? Surely the hegemony could be persuaded to cease these activities through diplomatic pressure. Commander Hyun-woo leaned forward. "Representative, with respect, the hegemony has been expanding for centuries. How has diplomacy worked so far?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Everyone in the room knew the answer. The Galactic Council had been negotiating with the hegemony for decades, while entire species disappeared from the galaxy. Captain Thyman spoke quietly. "My people sent diplomatic missions to the hegemony 12 times. They sent back recordings of our ambassadors being tortured to death. The 13th time, we tried to run." Zephys was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. Finally, she looked up at Admiral Taeho. "What do you intend to do now?" Taeho activated the holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red markers indicated hegemony-controlled systems, while yellow zones showed areas under attack or recently conquered. "The data we recovered shows active operations against 14 more star systems. Millions of civilians are being systematically exterminated while the Council debates proper procedures. You cannot simply declare war on an entire empire," Zephys protested. "There are protocols, procedures, diplomatic channels that must be followed." "Your protocols have failed," Captain So-Jin said bluntly. "While you've been talking, the hegemony has been killing. How many more species need to disappear before the Council acts?" Elder Krivek spoke for the first time since the representative arrived. "Honored Council member, my species has sent requests for assistance for 47 years. We have followed every protocol, filed every form, attended every hearing. In that time, our population has dropped from 8 billion to less than 50 million. Your procedures are slower than our extinction." The alien diplomat looked genuinely distressed. Her species valued harmony and consensus above all else, and the idea of unilateral action was deeply disturbing to her worldview. But you're talking about declaring war without council approval. One species cannot simply decide to attack another empire. There must be debate, discussion, proper authorization. Admiral Tejo walked to the viewport, looking out at the refugee. Ships his fleet was escorting to safety. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species, many of them the sole survivors of their civilizations. Representative Zephys, I want you to understand something about humans. We evolved on a world where hesitation meant death. Our entire history is built on the principle that sometimes violence is the only answer to violence. He turned back to face the room. The hegemony understands only one language: force. They've ignored your diplomatic protests for centuries while committing genocide. It's time someone spoke to them in terms they understand. Dr. G. Hai pulled up another file. On her datapad, the medical data shows evidence of systematic biological experimentation. They're not just killing these people. They're studying them, trying to develop more efficient methods of extermination. The representative stared at the data in horror. Her large eyes filled with tears, a universal mammalian response that crossed species lines. The Council will never approve military action on this scale, she whispered. Even if they wanted to, the bureaucracy alone would take years. Then the Council is part of the problem, Tejo replied. How many species will be extinct by the time your bureaucrats finish debating? Commander Hyunwoo activated his own display showing troop deployment options. Sir, intelligence indicates that hegemony forces are concentrated in 3 main staging areas. If we strike fast and hard, we can disrupt their entire campaign. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min's voice came through the intercom from the flight deck. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting hegemony reinforcements heading toward this system. Looks like they really didn't like what we did to their fleet. Representative Zephys looked around the room desperately. Please, Admiral Kim, at least give the Council time to respond. Send your evidence to the central government. Let them see what you've discovered. Surely when they understand the scope of the crisis. Tejo's expression was grim. Representative, you're welcome to send whatever reports you like. But understand this. Humanity will not stand by and watch genocide happen when we have the power to stop it. He activated the ship's communication system, opening a channel to the entire human fleet. All vessels, this is Admiral Kim. Based on intelligence gathered from enemy ships, we now know that the hegemony is conducting systematic extermination of civilian populations across 14 star systems. Effective immediately, humanity withdraws recognition of hegemony sovereignty. Any ship flying their colors is now considered a valid military target. The announcement echoed through the fleet and was automatically transmitted to human colonies across the galaxy. In less than an hour, it would reach Earth itself, and the human government would have to decide whether to support their admiral's decision. Representative Zephys stared at him in shock. You've just declared war on an empire with thousands of ships. You're one species among hundreds in the galaxy. Captain Sojin's quiet response chilled everyone in the room. We're Deathworlders, Representative. One is enough. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from 891 species packed the massive assembly hall on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication, creating a cacophony that the translation systems struggled to handle. Representative Veltari Zephys stood at the central podium, her pale blue skin showing stress patterns that indicated extreme emotional distress. Behind her, holographic displays showed footage from the Battle of Kepler Nebula, human ships tearing through hegemony forces with terrifying efficiency. "Honored colleagues," she began, her voice barely steady, "we face an unprecedented crisis. A single human fleet has unilaterally declared war on the hegemony empire, and they have already demonstrated the capability to follow through on their threat." The assembly erupted in discussion. Species that had never raised their voices in anger were shouting across the chamber. The hegemony had been a problem for centuries, but the idea of one species taking unilateral military action violated every principle the Council was built on. High Counselor Vexani, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Council, called for order. The human action, while understandable given the circumstances, cannot be condoned. We are a civilization built on law and consensus, not the brutal application of force. Admiral Kim Tae-ho appeared on the main display via quantum communication, speaking from the bridge of the Indomitable. Behind him, through the viewport, the assembled human fleet was visible. 47 ships that had just redefined galactic warfare. "Honored Council," Tae-ho began with diplomatic courtesy that fooled no one. "Humanity appreciates your concern for proper procedure. However, while you debate, the hegemony continues its campaign of systematic extermination." He activated his own holographic display showing the intelligence data recovered from hegemony ships. This is evidence of active genocide operations in 14 star systems, concentration camps, biological experimentation, and deliberate torture programs. The hegemony isn't just expanding, they're methodically exterminating every species they encounter. The chamber fell silent as the data was displayed. Even species that had lived in peace for millennia recognized the horror of what they were seeing. Counselor Thixis of the Raxan Coalition spoke first. "This evidence is disturbing. But surely diplomatic pressure can resolve this situation. Economic sanctions, trade restrictions, perhaps expulsion from certain galactic organizations." Dr. Yoonji Hai's voice joined the transmission from the human fleet. "Counselor Thixis, your species has been filing diplomatic protests against hegemony expansion for 40 years. In that time, 17 civilizations have gone extinct. How many more need to die while you debate sanctions?" The human doctor's words hit like physical blows. Every species in the chamber had filed similar protests, attended similar hearings, and watched helplessly as the hegemony grew stronger. Elder Kryvex appeared on a secondary display, speaking from one of the refugee ships under human protection. "Honored Council, my people sent 12 diplomatic missions to the hegemony. They returned recordings of our ambassadors being tortured to death. The humans ended our suffering in 20 minutes. Your procedures have failed us for half a century." Representative Zephys tried to regain control of the situation. "The scale of the human response is completely disproportionate. They destroyed an entire hegemony fleet without warning or negotiation." Admiral Tae-ho's expression remained calm, but his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Representative, the hegemony fleet was in the process of torturing civilian refugees for entertainment. What warning would have been appropriate? What negotiation stops genocide?" Counselor Vexani leaned forward in his speaking chair. "Admiral Kim, you must understand our position. If every species begins taking unilateral military action, the entire galactic order will collapse. Civilization requires law, not vigilante. Justice. Your law protects the strong and abandons the weak." Captain Park So-jin's voice cut through the transmission. The hegemony has violated every galactic convention for centuries while you watched. When law fails, justice must suffice. The debate raged for hours. Species after species stood to condemn human actions while simultaneously admitting that the hegemony threat was real and growing. The contradiction was obvious to everyone present. They all agreed something needed to be done, but none of them were willing to do it. Commander Lee Hyun-woo interrupted the discussion with a new transmission. Council members, I'm broadcasting live from a liberated hegemony prison camp. I think you need to see this. The display changed to show a planetary surface covered with massive detention facilities. Thousands of aliens from dozens of species were being led to medical stations by human marines, their bodies showing signs of systematic abuse and medical experimentation. This is Zerion 7, Hyun-woo's voice narrated as the camera panned across the facility. According to hegemony records, this camp held 47,000 prisoners from 18 different species. They were being used for biological warfare research and what can only be described as recreational torture. The images were devastating. Even the most peaceful species in the Council had evolved enough survival instinct to recognize evil when they saw it. The systematic nature of the hegemony's cruelty was beyond anything they had imagined. Sergeant Major Han Bo-ram appeared on screen, leading a group of liberated prisoners toward human medical stations. The hegemony guards fled when they realized, "We were humans." They left behind complete records of their experiments. Dr. Jihai's voice returned to the transmission. Council members, the medical data shows that the hegemony has been developing biological weapons specifically designed to target genetic markers unique to peaceful species. They're not just committing genocide, they're perfecting it. The chamber was absolutely silent. The implications were staggering. The hegemony wasn't just expanding their territory, they were working toward the complete elimination of every species that couldn't fight back. High Counselor Vexani spoke carefully. This evidence is unprecedented. However, the human response still violates every principle of galactic law. There must be consequences for unilateral action, regardless of the motivation. Admiral Taeho's image filled the main display. Counselor, I understand your position, but I want you to understand mine. Humanity grew up on a world where everything was trying to kill us. We learned that sometimes the only choice is between being a predator and being prey. He paused, letting his words sink in. The hegemony has made their choice. They prey on the weak and defenseless. That makes them our natural enemy. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min's voice cut through from the flight deck. Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting massive hegemony fleet movements. Looks like they're massing for a major offensive. The timing was perfect. As the Council debated proper procedure, the enemy was preparing to strike again. How many ships? Taeho asked. At least 200 capital ships, sir. They're converging on the Thanik system. It's a major refugee gathering point. The number hit the Council chamber like a physical blow. 200 capital ships meant the hegemony was committing their core fleet to crush the human upstarts and finish their extermination campaign. Representative Zephys looked around the chamber desperately. The Council must vote on proper response. We cannot allow... The vote is irrelevant, Admiral Taeho interrupted. By the time you reach consensus, another 50,000 civilians will be dead. High Counselor Vexani called for formal proceedings. All in favor of immediate military intervention against hegemony forces. Indicate your position. The voting began. Species after species registered their positions. Some supporting military action, others demanding diplomatic solutions, many abstaining entirely. The process would take days to complete, and everyone knew it. Admiral Tae-ho watched the debate with growing impatience. Council members, humanity appreciates your deliberations. However, we will not wait for bureaucratic approval to stop genocide. He turned to address his fleet. All ships, set course for the Thanix system. Maximum burn. We have a war to finish. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in chaos. For the first time in galactic history, a single species had declared total war against a major empire and had the military capability to follow through. Representative Zephys stared at the empty display where the human admiral had been. "What have we done?" she whispered. The answer came from Elder Kryvex, still speaking from the refugee ship under human protection. "You have done nothing as always. The humans have chosen to do everything." The vote continued, but everyone knew it no longer mattered. Somewhere in space, 47 human ships were racing toward a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. And for the first time in centuries, the innocent had champions willing to fight for them. The liberation of Zerion 7 had been the first step in what humans were privately calling the Freedom Campaign. Admiral Kim Tae-ho split his fleet into task forces, each led by experienced commanders who understood that conventional galactic warfare wouldn't work against hegemony numerical superiority. Captain Park So-jin stood on the bridge of her flagship Retribution, watching her destroyer squadron emerge from hyperspace at the edge of the Kalos system. Intelligence indicated a major hegemony mining operation here, where hundreds of thousands of alien slaves extracted rare minerals under brutal conditions. "Tactical analysis," she ordered. Her sensor officer, Lieutenant Kim Min-soo, studied the display. 12 orbital platforms, 6 escort cruisers, and what looks like a mobile command station. The planet shows massive industrial activity and significant life signs. Through the viewports, Kalos 3 was visible as a scarred brown world, its surface covered with mining operations that had turned entire continents into open pits. The atmosphere was thick with industrial pollution that would be toxic to most species. "Ma'am," called her communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet. It's weak and heavily encrypted." The signal resolved into a desperate, alien voice speaking broken standard galactic. "Any ships? Please help. We are mining slaves on Kalos 3. Hegemony guards kill workers for sport. Thousands dying every day." So-jin's expression hardened. This was the pattern they had found at every hegemony facility. Not just economic exploitation, but systematic cruelty designed to break the spirits of enslaved populations. All ships, battle stations, were going in fast and hard. The destroyer. Squadron accelerated toward the planet at maximum burn. Human ships could handle acceleration that would kill alien crews, giving them a crucial advantage in the opening moments of any engagement. Commander Lee Hyun-woo's voice came through the intercom from the Marine section. "Captain, my troops are ready for planetary assault. We've got drop pods loaded with medical supplies and liberation equipment." The hegemony forces detected the approaching human ships and responded according to their standard doctrine. The escort, cruisers moved to intercept while the orbital platforms prepared to fire on any ships that got through. "Enemy cruisers are moving to engagement range," reported the tactical officer. "They're following standard formation patterns." So-jin smiled grimly. "They still don't understand how we fight. All ships, attack formation Delta. Target their command ship first." What followed was a masterclass in human naval warfare. Instead of engaging at long range like civilized species, The destroyers closed to point-blank range, where their superior armor and weapons could overcome the enemy's size advantage. The lead hegemony cruiser, expecting a cautious long-range duel, found itself facing a human destroyer at knife-fighting distance. Sojin's ship fired continuously, its weapons designed to punch through asteroid hulls and space debris. The enemy's shields collapsed under the sustained barrage. "Boarding parties launch when ready," Sojin ordered. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min led his fighter squadron in support of the attack, his pilots executing maneuvers that would have been impossible for alien crews. They wove between the orbital platforms, striking at critical systems while avoiding the slower hegemony defensive fire. On the planet's surface, hegemony ground forces were preparing for a siege. They had faced slave rebellions before and knew how to crush them. What they hadn't faced was a species that had perfected warfare on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Commander Hyun Woo's Marines launched from orbit in assault pods, small craft designed to punch through planetary defenses and deliver troops directly to their targets. The pods scattered across the planet's surface, hitting dozens of mining facilities simultaneously. Sergeant Major Han Bo Ram led the assault on the main command complex, a fortress built into a mountain that housed the hegemony administrators. Her demolition charges were designed to crack asteroids and open up sealed habitats. Bringing down a building was child's play. "Breaching charges set," she reported over the radio. "All teams, clear the blast zone." The explosion tore through the fortress's outer wall like paper. Human Marines poured through the gap, their armor designed to function in vacuum and toxic atmospheres. The hegemony guards, equipped for controlling helpless slaves, found themselves facing soldiers who had trained for combat in environments that would kill most living things. The battle was over in 3 hours. 6 hegemony cruisers destroyed or captured, all orbital platforms neutralized, and the planetary defenses collapsed. The liberation of Kalos 3 had cost the human force 2 fighters and minor damage to 3 ships. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai coordinated the medical response from orbit, directing relief supplies to the liberated mining facilities. Her teams had become experts at treating the effects of systematic abuse and starvation. "The medical situation is severe," she reported to Captain Sojin. "Estimated 70,000 survivors showing signs of deliberate malnutrition and chemical poisoning. The hegemony was literally working them to death." The liberated slaves came from 18 different species, many of whom had never seen humans before. Their reactions ranged from terror to desperate gratitude as human medical teams began treating injuries that had been deliberately ignored for years. Elder Vexdal, a leader among the survivors, spoke for many when he addressed the human. "Commander, we had given up hope. The hegemony told us that no one would come, that the galaxy had abandoned us to our fate." Commander Hyun Woo's response was simple and direct. "The galaxy might have abandoned you, but humans don't abandon the innocent." The pattern repeated across 6 star systems over the following weeks. Human task forces would appear without warning, overwhelm hegemony defenses through superior tactics and technology, liberate slave populations, and depart before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Each victory brought new intelligence about hegemony operations and new alien allies eager to join the fight. Species that had been written off as extinct were found in labor camps and research facilities. Their populations reduced, but not eliminated. Lieutenant Dong-min's fighter wing had grown to include volunteer pilots from a dozen species, aliens, who had learned human combat techniques and wanted revenge against their former captors. The mixed squadrons were less disciplined than pure human units. but they made up for it with raw determination. "The hegemony is learning to fear us," Dongmin reported during a strategy briefing. "Their ships are fleeing when they detect human transponder signals, even when they have numerical superiority." Captain So-Jin studied the tactical displays showing hegemony fleet movements. "They're consolidating their forces around their core systems. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major counterattack." The liberation campaign had been more successful than anyone had hoped, but it had also drawn the attention of the hegemony's main fleet. 200 capital ships were massing in the Thanex system, preparing to crush the human rebels and finish their extermination campaign once and for all. Admiral Taeho's voice came through the communication system from the main fleet. "All task forces, return to rendezvous point. The enemy is massing their core fleet for a decisive battle. It's time to show them what happens when predators get serious." As the human ships prepared to rejoin the main fleet, the liberated populations they left behind began organizing their own defenses. The humans had given them more than freedom. They had given them hope and the knowledge that tyrants could be defeated. The galaxy was about to witness the largest space battle in recorded history, and for the first time in centuries, the innocent had champions willing to fight for them. The outcome would determine whether the hegemony's reign of terror would continue or whether a new age of freedom was about to begin. Elder Kryvex, speaking from one of the refugee ships, summed up what many were thinking. "The humans fight like demons when protecting others, but they fight like angels when seeking justice. The hegemony has awakened something terrible and wonderful, and now they must face the consequences." The stage was set for the final confrontation. Between the galaxy's greatest predators, one species that preyed on the weak and another that had chosen to protect them. 6 months after the Battle of Thanex system, the galaxy was still struggling to understand what had happened. The hegemony, a brutal empire that had terrorized peaceful species for centuries, had simply ceased to exist. Their remaining territories had either surrendered without resistance or been liberated by rapidly expanding human task forces. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood before the reformed Galactic Council in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime. The chamber looked different now. Dozens of species that had been presumed extinct were present, their representatives taking seats that had been empty for generations. The survivors of hegemony labor camps and prison worlds had been given full voting rights in recognition of their suffering. Representative Veltari Zephys, who had once opposed human actions, now served as the liaison between the old galactic order and the new reality. Her pale blue skin showed patterns of respect as she addressed the assembly. 6 months ago, this council debated whether one species had the right to challenge an empire. Today, we gather to recognize a new galactic order built on the principle that freedom is worth fighting for. The main display showed statistics that would have been impossible to believe before the human intervention. 17 species that had been listed as extinct were now rebuilding their civilizations. Over 2 million enslaved beings had been liberated from hegemony facilities. Not a single hegemony military unit remained active in known space. Elder Kryvex spoke for the coalition of liberated worlds, his ancient voice carrying the weight of centuries of suffering finally ended. "The humans did not seek to rule us. They sought to free us. There is a difference that the galaxy is still learning to understand." Admiral Taeho remained standing as various species offered thanks, praise, and formal recognition. He had not sought this attention, but understood its importance. The galaxy needed to see that humans were not conquerors, despite their terrifying military capabilities. The hegemony was defeated not by superior technology or numbers, he addressed the assembly, but by the simple principle that some things are worth dying for. Every human ship in that final battle was prepared to sacrifice everything to protect the innocent. Captain Park So-jin had been promoted to admiral and now commanded the new Galactic Defense Coalition, a joint military force that included ships and crews from 43 species. The mixed fleets were less efficient than pure human units, but they served an important purpose, showing the galaxy that humans fought with allies, not subjects. The Defense Coalition exists to ensure that no species ever again faces what the hegemony's victims endured, So-jin explained to the assembled representatives. We are not an occupying force, we are guardians. Dr. Yoon-ji Hee had established the Institute for Interspecies Medical Cooperation, using human adaptability and medical technology to solve health crises across dozens of worlds. Her work had saved millions of lives and established humanity as the galaxy's premier medical researchers. Human medicine is effective because we evolved on a world that constantly tried to kill us, she told the medical council. Every disease, every toxin, every environmental hazard that exists in known space is something we've already faced and conquered. Commander Lee Hyun-woo led the new Galactic Peacekeeping Corps, training former slaves and oppressed populations in human military doctrine. His academies had become pilgrimage sites for species seeking to protect themselves from future tyrants. We teach not just tactics and weapons, he explained to his latest class of alien cadets, but the mindset of protection. A true warrior fights not for conquest, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. Lieutenant Choi Dong-min, now wing commander, led mixed-species fighter squadrons that patrolled former hegemony space. The young pilot who had once been nervous before battle now trained others to overcome their fears. Fear is natural, he told his diverse group of pilots. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite fear to protect others. The transformation of galactic civilization was remarkable. Species that had hidden for centuries were emerging from isolation. Trade routes that had been closed for generations were reopening. Scientific cooperation was advancing knowledge at unprecedented rates. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical. The galaxy had learned that sometimes violence was the only answer to violence, that there were causes worth fighting for, and that true strength came from protecting the weak rather than exploiting them. Representative Zephys addressed this new reality in her closing remarks to the council session. The humans have taught us that civilization is not about avoiding conflict, it's about choosing the right conflicts. They showed us that sometimes the most civilized response to brutality is overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. High Counselor Vexani, who had once opposed human action, now served as an advisor to the new order. The humans did not change our laws, he observed. They reminded us why those laws exist, to protect the innocent and ensure justice. When our laws failed to do that, they did what we could not. Admiral Tae-ho prepared to leave the council chamber, his duty to the political process complete. The human fleet waited in orbit, ready to respond to the next crisis, the next call for help from those who could not help themselves. As he walked toward the exit, Elder Kryvex approached with a question that many were thinking, but few dared ask. Admiral, what will humanity do now? You have reshaped the galaxy in 6 months. Where do you go from here? Tae-ho paused, considering the question carefully. Around him, representatives from hundreds of species waited for his answer. Some hopeful, Some nervous, all aware that humanity now possessed the most powerful military force in known space. Elder Krivex, "Humanity will do what we have always done," he replied. "We will adapt to whatever challenges arise, protect those who need protection, and explore the unknown. The galaxy is vast, and there are always new threats to face and new friends to make." Through the great windows of the council chamber, the assembled representatives could see the human fleet in orbit. 47 ships that had redefined warfare, commanded by a species that had chosen to use their terrifying capabilities for protection rather than conquest. Dr. G. High's final report to the council captured the essence of what had changed. The galaxy spent centuries debating how to respond to evil. Humanity simply responded. They showed us that good intentions without action are meaningless, that protection requires strength, and that sometimes the most peaceful outcome requires the willingness to fight. As the human fleet prepared to depart Nexus Prime, signals were already arriving from distant sectors. New threats were emerging, new species needed assistance, new challenges awaited. The galaxy was larger and more dangerous than anyone had imagined, but for the first time in centuries, the innocent had champions. Captain So-Jin stood on the bridge of her new flagship, watching the stars wheel past as the Defense Coalition fleet took formation. Around her, human and alien officers worked side by side, united by the common purpose of protecting the defenseless. "Ma'am," called her communications officer, "we're receiving a distress signal from the Outer Rim. Unknown hostiles attacking civilian populations." So-Jin smiled grimly. The work was never finished, but that was exactly how humans preferred it. They were predators evolved for protection, warriors built for peace, and they had finally found their place in the galaxy. "Set course for the Outer Rim," she ordered. "Maximum burn. Time to remind the galaxy that some things are still worth fighting for." The fleet turned toward the unknown, carrying with them the promise that had transformed galactic civilization. No matter how dark the galaxy became, no matter how powerful the enemy somewhere in space, Deathworlders were watching, and they would not let evil triumph while they drew breath.